Welcome to our deep dive on sleep. We got some fascinating sources here, all about why it's so important and how we can all get more of it.
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of us have this idea that sleep is just wasted time, like it's something we have to do but would rather avoid.
It's true. And that's a real shame. A shame because the science is super clear that sleep is connected to every single part of our well-being,
Mm.
our physical health, our mental health.
It even affects our relationships.
It really does.
From what I'm seeing here, sleep deprivation isn't just making us, a little bit groggy in the mornings.
Mm.
It's linked to some serious problems like heart disease, obesity, even Alzheimer's. It's kind of scary.
It is alarming when you dig into the research. You know what's really interesting to me is how this war on sleep we have going on is tied up with how we view productivity and success.
Yeah.
We've got everyone from Benjamin Franklin dissing on sleep.
Napoleon calling 8 hours for fools.
Right. And even today you see modern CEOs bragging about how little sleep they get.
It's like a badge of honor to be exhausted. We'll definitely talk about how those attitudes are shifting, especially in the sports world later on. But first,
Yeah.
let's break down the science.
Okay.
The sources mention a bunch of different theories about why we sleep.
Right.
Everything from hiding from predators
Oh, yeah.
to cleaning out our brains.
Mm.
Where do we even start with all of that?
Well, I think some theories are definitely more convincing than others, like that inactivity theory, the one about how sleep helped us avoid predators back in the caveman days. It doesn't quite add up, does it?
Not really.
Yeah.
Being unconscious in a world full of danger?
Yeah, not a great survival strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The sources also talk about this energy conservation theory. The idea that sleep is all about conserving calories.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess makes sense. Like when we're asleep, we're not moving around.
Right.
So we're not burning as much energy.
Hmm.
But I'm guessing it's probably more complicated than that.
Yeah, there's more to it than that, for sure. The most convincing theories really revolve around these restorative functions of sleep and this idea of brain plasticity. It's like, think of it this way. During the day, our brains are like a bustling city, right? Full of activity generating waste.
Lots of trash.
Yeah. And then sleep is when the sanitation crew comes in and cleans everything up. So you wake up feeling refreshed and your brain can function at its best.
So we're not just talking about feeling rested. Our brains are literally cleaning house while we sleep.
It's amazing, right?
That is amazing. What's really wild is that the sources link this cleaning process to preventing some serious diseases.
Oh, absolutely.
Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's, yeah. And it's not just Alzheimer's either. Poor sleep has been linked to a higher risk of heart disease, stroke, diabetes, even some types of cancer. The impact is huge.
It's like we're really playing with fire when we don't make sleep a priority. It's kind of scary to think about the long-term consequences.
Yeah, it's a big deal, a serious public health concern. And unfortunately, so many of us are stuck in this trap of not getting enough sleep.
Right.
It's like we live in a culture that glorifies being busy all the time.
Right, like being busy is a badge of honor, almost.
Yeah, and we see sleep as this luxury or even a waste of time.
It's true. Some of the statistics in these sources about how much sleep we're not getting as a society are shocking.
Oh, yeah.
Like, seriously alarming.
The numbers are definitely concerning. Studies are showing that a huge chunk of adults are not getting anywhere near that recommended 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. The cost of all this, lost productivity, healthcare expenses.
It's got to be massive.
It's immense.
And it's not just adults either. Teenagers,
Oh, yeah.
shift workers, new parents.
Yeah.
They're all struggling to get enough sleep, too. It's like this big epidemic.
It impacts everyone, but it's true. Different groups face unique challenges. Like teenagers. Their natural sleep cycles are later, but they're forced to wake up early for school.
Yeah, it's like we're fighting biology. And then you have people like new parents and shift workers.
Mm-hmm.
Their sleep deprivation is almost built into their circumstances.
Absolutely. They're up against these systemic challenges that make prioritizing sleep so hard. You know what I thought was really interesting in the sources? This idea of segmented sleep.
Segmented sleep.
Yeah, where you sleep in 2 chunks throughout the night.
Okay.
Apparently that was the norm for centuries.
Wait, seriously, I've never heard of that. Tell me more.
It's true. Before we had artificial light, people would have this first sleep, and then they'd wake up for an hour or two, and they'd use that time to do all sorts of things.
Wow.
Pray, read, socialize, even visit their neighbors.
So our obsession with sleeping through the night in one long stretch,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's not even natural.
Right. It makes you think, doesn't it? It really challenges that assumption.
It totally changes my perspective.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way from sleeping in segments to trying to cram all of our sleep into one block. And speaking of modern life, it seems like technology is both a blessing and a curse when it comes to sleep.
Oh, for sure.
On one hand, we have all these amazing sleep trackers and apps to help us,
Yeah.
but then we also have our phones, which are like little sleep-stealing monsters in our pockets.
It's a double-edged sword. That blue light they emit, it messes with our melatonin production.
Yeah, that makes it harder to fall asleep.
Right. And then all those notifications
And the fear of missing out.
keeps our brains in this state of like hyper-arousal.
It's tough to wind down.
It is.
I'm totally guilty of scrolling through my phone in bed. It's like this bad habit that I just can't break.
It's so common. We're basically trained to respond to every ping and notification. But, the truth is, our bedrooms should be these sanctuaries for sleep, a place where we can escape from all that digital noise.
So no more doom scrolling for me. All right, shifting gears a bit here. The sources also had some interesting stuff about relying on sleeping pills.
Oh, yeah.
They're not all they're cracked up to be, are they?
It's a really important point. Sleeping pills might seem like this quick fix for sleep problems, but they can come with some unwanted side effects and can actually lead to dependence in the long run.
It's like they don't really address the root cause of the problem.
Exactly.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Right, exactly.
Oh,
It's crucial to tackle the root of the problem, whether that's stress, anxiety, poor sleep hygiene, or an underlying medical condition. Masking the symptoms with pills isn't a good long-term solution.
so where do we go from here? The sources are full of tips and strategies for improving sleep, but it feels a little overwhelming to know where to start.
Yeah, it can be. I think the best thing to remember is that it's all about figuring out what works for you as an individual. Everyone's different. There's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to sleep.
So instead of trying to overhaul every single thing about our sleep all at once,
Right.
maybe we start by identifying one or two areas where we could make some adjustments.
Baby steps, right? Exactly. Even small changes can make a big difference over time. And one of the most basic things that the sources emphasized is the importance of consistency. It might sound simple, but having a regular sleep schedule, even on weekends, can really help.
Yeah, it's like training our bodies to expect sleep at a certain time, setting that internal alarm clock.
Exactly.
But what about those nights when you just can't switch off?
Mm.
The sources talk a lot about the importance of having a relaxing bedtime routine.
Ah, the bedtime routine. It is so important.
What does it look like?
Well, that last hour or two before bed, it should really be about winding down, signaling to your body that it's time to transition into sleep mode.
So no more screens right before bed.
Yeah.
Got it. What are some good alternatives?
Oh, there are lots. Things like taking a hot bath, reading a book, listening to some calming music, or even doing some gentle stretching. These can all help you relax and prepare for sleep.
I love the idea of a warm bath before bed. One of the sources even mentioned adding Epsom salts to the bath. Is there anything to that? Is that an old wives' tale?
It's not a myth at all. Epsom salts are full of magnesium, which is known to help relax muscles and promote sleep. So adding them to your bath can help you unwind and get ready for a good night's rest.
Soaking away stress and prepping for sleep. Sounds good to me.
Uh-huh.
Another thing that came up a lot in the sources was controlling light exposure. That makes sense because the modern world is full of bright lights, even at night.
It's true. And light is so important for regulating our circadian rhythm, that internal clock that controls our sleep-wake cycle. Being exposed to bright light, especially the blue light that comes from electronics, it can actually suppress our melatonin production.
Which makes it harder to fall asleep.
Exactly.
So if we're staring at our phones and TVs right before bed, we're sending our bodies mixed signals.
We are. We're basically telling our bodies that it's time to be awake, not asleep.
Got it. So dimmer switches, blue light blocking glasses, those are a good idea. What about blackout curtains?
Blackout curtains are a great investment, especially if you live somewhere with a lot of light pollution.
Right.
They help create a truly dark sleep environment, which can do wonders for your sleep quality.
Okay, light, check. What about temperature? Is there an ideal temperature for sleep? I feel like I sleep better when it's a little cooler.
You know you're not alone there. Research has actually found that our bodies sleep best when it's cool. The ideal temperature is somewhere between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit.
So maybe turning up the AC before bed could help us sleep better. Who knew?
It's worth experimenting with, and if you tend to get cold at night, layering blankets is a better option than blasting the heat, because overheating can actually mess with your sleep.
Makes sense. It's all about finding that sweet spot. Not too hot, not too cold. Now let's talk about food and drink. The sources mentioned a few things to avoid before bed, like caffeine and alcohol.
Right. It's generally a good idea to avoid large meals, caffeine, and alcohol in those hours leading up to bedtime. Big meals can interfere with digestion and make it harder to fall asleep.
Okay.
And caffeine and alcohol can disrupt your sleep later in the night.
So no more late night coffee or that nightcap if you're trying to prioritize sleep.
Probably best to avoid them. No, some people actually find that a small bedtime snack can help them sleep better,
Oh, interesting.
like a handful of almonds or a glass of warm milk.
And one of the sources mentioned tart cherry juice as a natural sleep aid. Something about it being a good source of melatonin?
It's true. Tart cherries naturally contain melatonin.
Wow.
So drinking a small glass before bed or eating a serving of tart cherries might help you fall asleep more easily.
That sounds much better than a sleeping pill. Speaking of which, we've covered a lot of ground here. But what about people who have tried all these things? Like they've made changes to their routine, but they're still not sleeping well.
Right.
The sources stress the importance of seeking professional help in that case.
Oh, absolutely. If you've made lifestyle changes and you're still struggling to get a good night's sleep, it's really important to talk to your doctor or a sleep specialist.
Because there could be something else going on,
Yeah.
like a medical condition.
Exactly. There might be an underlying medical condition that needs to be addressed, like sleep apnea or restless legs syndrome.
It's good to remember that sometimes we need expert help. There's no shame in that.
There isn't. And there are people who can provide really personalized guidance to help you address your specific sleep challenges.
So as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive into sleep, what's the biggest takeaway for our listener? What's the one thing you really want them to remember?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that sleep is not a luxury.
Yeah.
It's essential.
It's not something we can just skip.
Right. It's as fundamental to our health and well-being as food, water, and air. We need to stop glorifying busyness and start making rest a priority. It's time we reclaimed our right to sleep.
It is. Maybe that means ditching your phone in the bedroom, creating a new bedtime routine, or even experimenting with some tart cherry juice. There's a whole world of sleep out there to explore.
There is.
And the rewards for getting good rest, they can truly be life-changing.
All right, so let's move on and talk about some specific sleep disorders. This might seem like a niche topic, but you know it's actually way more common than people think.
You're right. It is.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that you don't really think about until it's affecting you or someone you know.
Exactly.
The sources mentioned a bunch of different sleep disorders. Insomnia seems like a big one. You know, the classic tossing and turning all night, staring at the ceiling, unable to fall asleep.
Insomnia is definitely very prevalent, and it can manifest in a few different ways. Some people struggle to fall asleep in the first place. Others wake up in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep.
And then there's that awful early morning wake up
Right.
where you're wide awake hours before your alarm is supposed to go off.
Exactly.
Ugh, that sounds exhausting.
It is.
I'm guessing it can be more than just an annoyance, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the, broader impacts of insomnia?
Well, chronic insomnia can really have serious implications for both your physical and mental health.
Okay.
We're talking daytime fatigue, problems concentrating, mood swings, even an increased risk of accidents.
Yeah.
It's definitely not something to take lightly.
It's easy to just dismiss it as a minor inconvenience.
Yeah.
The sources also talk about this thing called conditioned arousal, which I thought was interesting. It's like your brain gets trained to not sleep when you're in bed.
It is. It's a vicious cycle. So if you've had a few nights in a row of struggling to sleep, you might start to feel anxious as soon as you get into bed.
Yeah, like anticipating another bad night.
Right. And that anxiety just makes it even harder to fall asleep.
Like your mind is working against you. How do you break that cycle? The sources mentioned some techniques like actually getting out of bed if you can't sleep and only going back when you're actually feeling sleepy.
Exactly.
It seems kind of counterintuitive, but I guess it's about breaking that negative association with being in bed, right?
It is. It's about retraining your brain to see the bed as a cue for sleep, not a trigger for anxiety.
Okay.
There's also a specific type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia.
CBTI.
CBTI, yeah. It can be really helpful in addressing these negative thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to insomnia.
So for anyone out there who's struggling with insomnia, CBT would be something to look into. All right, so that's insomnia. What about sleep apnea?
Okay.
That one sounds a little scarier to me.
Sleep apnea is definitely a serious condition, and it's basically characterized by these pauses in breathing while you're asleep,
Okay.
often accompanied by loud snoring.
So it's not just snoring. What makes it different from that?
Well, snoring can be a symptom of sleep apnea, but not everyone who snores has it. With sleep apnea, those pauses in breathing can last for several seconds,
Wow.
sometimes even minutes, and it can happen repeatedly throughout the night.
That sounds really scary.
Yeah.
I can see why that's considered serious.
It is. And these pauses in breathing don't just disrupt sleep
Right.
and lead to daytime sleepiness, they also put a strain on your cardiovascular system.
Okay.
So, untreated sleep apnea has been linked to high blood pressure, heart disease, even stroke.
I had no idea it was connected to all of that.
It is, yeah.
So if you think you might have sleep apnea, you need to go see a doctor.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really important to talk to your doctor if you suspect you might have sleep apnea. There are effective treatments out there like continuous positive airway pressure therapy, CPAP, right. It basically helps to keep your airway open while you're sleeping.
So early detection is key. The sources also touched on some less common sleep disorders,
Yeah,
but they're equally fascinating. One that caught my eye was exploding head syndrome. I mean, that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
it does, doesn't it? It's a very dramatic name.
It is.
So, exploding head syndrome is basically characterized by this sudden loud noise. It's like an explosion or a crash.
Inside your head.
Yeah, it seems to originate inside your head.
Wow.
But I should clarify, it's not actually an explosion happening in your brain.
Oh, good.
It's actually harmless, but it can be pretty frightening.
Yeah.
It's a sensory phenomenon that typically happens as people are falling asleep or waking up.
Oh, wow.
We don't know exactly what causes it, but it's thought to be related to this sudden shift in brain activity.
That's so strange. It really highlights how much we still don't know about what's going on in our brains when we're asleep.
It's true. There's so much that we're still learning and discovering about sleep. And, while some of these less common sleep disorders might seem a little bizarre or even a little amusing, it's important to remember that they can have a real impact on people's lives.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that impact our lives, the sources spend some time talking about how our relationship with sleep has evolved over time. And it seems like our modern sleep patterns are really a pretty recent thing, like a
Yep.
big shift from how humans slept for centuries.
Yeah, that's right. Like we talked about earlier, segmented sleep, where people would wake up for a period in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually the norm for a very long time.
And I think you mentioned that artificial light was really the culprit in disrupting that natural rhythm.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
The invention of electric light basically extended our waking hours and eventually led us to consolidate our sleep into this one long block.
So something as seemingly simple as light can have this huge impact on our biology.
Exactly. It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
It really puts into perspective how much our modern world has shaped the way we sleep.
Mm-hmm. For better and for worse, right?
Yeah.
And this historical perspective is so valuable, I think,
Yeah.
because it really challenges our assumptions about what's normal and natural when it comes to sleep.
Like, maybe our bodies aren't actually designed to sleep in one continuous stretch.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does. It's a real mind shift. So we're essentially battling against centuries of ingrained habits and these cultural norms around sleep. How do we even begin to reclaim our right to rest?
Well, I think it all starts with awareness.
Yeah.
We need to recognize how important sleep is, and we need to challenge those cultural norms that prioritize busyness and sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our mindset, moving away from this idea that sleep is a waste of time and starting to think of it as an investment in our health and well-being.
That makes sense. But how do we actually put that into practice?
Well, that's what we'll talk about next.
Okay, great.
The good news is the sources are full of practical tips for improving sleep. So we'll break those down and hopefully make it easier for people to start taking action and prioritizing their sleep.
All right, so we've talked about the science behind sleep. We've looked at the history of sleep. We've even touched on some of the things that can go wrong when we don't get enough.
Right.
But now let's get to the good stuff. The sources are full of tips and tricks for better sleep. From creating a wind-down routine to making our bedrooms the perfect sleep sanctuary.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. Where do we even begin? It can feel kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get lost in all the advice out there. The key is to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to sleep. It's really about finding what works for you.
So instead of trying to change everything about our sleep all at once,
Yeah,
maybe we just focus on one or two areas where we can make some adjustments.
exactly. Even small changes can make a big difference over time. And one of the most fundamental things the sources talk about is consistency. It might sound simple, but having a regular sleep schedule, even on weekends, can be huge.
Yeah, it's like we're training our bodies to expect sleep at a certain time, like setting that internal alarm clock. But what about those nights when you just can't seem to switch off your brain? The sources talk a lot about creating a relaxing bedtime routine.
The bedtime routine is so important. That last hour or two before bed should really be dedicated to winding down, signaling to your body that it's time to transition into sleep mode.
Okay, so we ditch the screens an hour or two before bed.
Right.
Got it. But what are some good alternatives? What should we be doing instead?
There are lots of options. Things like taking a hot bath, reading a book, listening to some calming music, even doing some gentle stretching can all help you relax and prepare for sleep.
I do love a good bath before bed. One of the sources even mentioned adding Epsom salts to the bath.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
there anything to that? Or is that just an old wives' tale?
It's not a myth. Epsom salts are a great source of magnesium, which is known to help relax your muscles and promote sleep. So a warm bath with Epsom salts can help you unwind and get ready for a good night's rest.
Soaking away the stress and prepping for sleep. I love it. Another thing that came up a lot in the sources was controlling light exposure,
Yeah.
which makes sense because our world is full of bright lights these days, even at night.
It's true. And light plays a big role in regulating our circadian rhythm, that internal clock that tells our bodies when to sleep and when to wake up. And exposure to bright light, especially blue light from electronics, can mess with our melatonin production.
And melatonin is that hormone that helps us feel sleepy.
Exactly.
So if we're on our phones or watching TV right before bed,
Yeah.
we're sending our bodies mixed signals.
You are. You're basically telling your body that it's time to be awake, not asleep.
Got it. So dimmer switches and blue light blocking glasses, those are
Mhm.
good ideas. What about blackout curtains? Do those really make a difference?
They can. Blackout curtains are great, especially if you live in an area with a lot of light pollution. They can really help create a truly dark sleep environment, which can do wonders for sleep quality.
Okay, light, check. Now what about temperature? Is there an ideal temperature for sleeping? I always feel like I sleep better when it's cooler.
You're not the only one. Studies have actually shown that our bodies sleep best in a cool environment. The ideal temperature is somewhere between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit.
Interesting. So maybe turning up the AC a bit before bed could actually help us sleep better.
It's worth a try. And if you tend to get cold at night, just add more blankets instead of blasting the heat, because overheating can actually disrupt your sleep.
That makes sense. It's all about finding that Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold. All right, let's move on to food and drink. The sources mention some things to avoid before bed, like caffeine and alcohol.
Right. It's generally a good idea to avoid large meals, caffeine, and alcohol in the hours leading up to bedtime. Heavy meals can interfere with digestion and make it harder to fall asleep, and caffeine and alcohol can disrupt your sleep later in the night.
Okay, so maybe skip that late night coffee or that nightcap if you're really serious about getting a good night's sleep.
Probably a good idea. Now, some people find that a small bedtime snack can actually help them sleep better,
Oh, interesting.
like a handful of almonds or a glass of warm milk.
And one of the sources talked about the benefits of tart cherry juice as a natural sleep aid. Something about it being a good source of melatonin.
That's right. Tart cherries do contain melatonin naturally, so drinking a small glass before bed or having some tart cherries might actually make it easier to fall asleep.
That sounds a lot better than taking a sleeping pill.
Mm.
Speaking of which, we've covered a lot of ground here. But what about those people who have tried all these things? They've made changes to their routine, but they're still struggling to sleep well. The sources really stress the importance of seeking professional help in that case.
Absolutely. If you've made lifestyle changes and you're still having trouble sleeping, it's really important to talk to your doctor or a sleep specialist.
Because there could be an underlying medical condition at play.
Exactly. It's possible there's something else going on that needs to be addressed, like sleep apnea or restless leg syndrome.
Right.
It's important to remember that sometimes we need a little extra help. And there's absolutely no shame in reaching out to a professional.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've covered just about everything. As we wrap up our deep dive on sleep, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember? What's the biggest takeaway?
The biggest takeaway is this. Sleep is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's as essential for our health and well-being as eating right, drinking water, and breathing clean air. It's time to stop glorifying busyness and start prioritizing rest. It's time to reclaim our right to sleep.
It is. Maybe that means putting your phone away an hour before bed, creating a relaxing bedtime routine, or even giving tart cherry juice a try. The world of sleep is vast and fascinating, and the rewards for getting good rest are truly life-changing. Sweet dreams, everyone.